This is Speak Up Newport's monthly webinar program. Good afternoon. My name is Ed Selich. I'm president of Speak Up Newport. And I want to welcome you to our fifth webinar in our series of programs we're presenting during the current pandemic crisis. And I apologize that we don't have video. We're having some technical issues with Zoom. So we're just going to move ahead with audio only and hope that you'll stay with us during the program this afternoon. Speak Up Newport is continuing our 39-year tradition of presenting monthly programs via these Zoom webinars. And if you missed our first four and you'd like to see them, you can go to our website, www.speakupnewport.com, to view them. Speak Up Newport is a community forum. We discuss civic issues. We do 10 programs a year. We also do the annual Mayor's Dinner. It's going to be our 40th in 2021. And we award 4 $3,000 scholarships to Corona Del Mar and Newport Harbor High School seniors each year. Now this afternoon, we have a really interesting program. It's on law enforcement challenges with COVID-19 restrictions and civil unrest. We've seen the open, close cycle of restrictions over the past couple of months. We've also seen civil unrest nationwide, but thankfully not in Orange County. And this has presented unprecedented challenges to our city and county law enforcement agencies. So here today to address how they're dealing with these challenges are Orange County Sheriff Don Barnes. And thank you for taking time out from your busy schedule, Don, to participate. And also Newport Beach Chief of Police, John Lewis. And thanks to you, John, also for participating. Now, if you want to ask a question and the video comes on, you can click on the chat button at the bottom of the screen and type in a question, and you can do that at any time during the program. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Speak Up Newport board member, Robin Grant. Robin?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I will start this portion of the program by introducing our two panelists, and I'll start with Sheriff Don Barnes, who was elected the 13th Sheriff Coroner for Orange County in November of 2018. He began his law enforcement career with the Orange County Sheriff's Department in 1989. With 3 decades of service to the people of Orange County, Sheriff Barnes is well versed in the public safety needs of Orange County residents. As Sheriff, Don Barnes is leading initiatives aimed at reducing the prevalence of drugs in our neighborhoods, enhancing school safety, mitigating the impacts of homelessness, and advocating for the restoration of accountability to our criminal justice system. Welcome, Sheriff Barnes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Somebody has an open mic on Grant, I believe. Do you want me to start now, or would you like me to wait until you introduce Chief Lewis?
Why don't you go ahead and give your introduction and presentation, and then we'll move on to Chief Lewis, and then after that we'll have a period of questions and answers.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to your group. If you're just getting on, there is some issues with the video, which is why we're doing this audio only at this part. First, let me compliment Chief Lewis and the Newport Beach Police Department. We have a great relationship. John and I are good friends, and we oftentimes allows us to collaborate and complement each other in the way we deliver public safety services throughout Orange County. As you mentioned, the 2 issues we've dealt with predominantly this year has been COVID-19, obviously since the beginning of the year, and then for a brief period, some civil unrest. Nationally, that did have some impacts here in Orange County. I'll cover those through my presentation, but we are working closely in all this regard. I did also see the mayor, Will O'Neill, is on, and Will is a good friend of mine also. First, I'd like to congratulate Will O'Neill on his victory. I think you're running unopposed. At least that's what the register reported, and I hope that stays that way for you. I think you're doing a phenomenal job leading Newport Beach through the challenges of 2020. So specific to COVID-19, and I'll try to be about 10 or 15 minutes, and if you need me to stop, please just interrupt, and I will stop presenting, but I'll cover some high points. I don't want to cover issues that I think Chief Lewis would cover specific to Newport Beach. We were able to get out in COVID-19 ahead in a preparatory manner in preparation of what might happen in Orange County. We did that by following what was happening obviously internationally, abroad, and then what happened first on the East Coast, anticipating it would come to Orange County or at least to the West Coast in California. We took some preemptive steps, both within our community, how we delivered services, and as well as what we did within our jail to try to control the infection into Orange County Jail. And then once that did happen in about mid-March, how we responded to it through some, what I believe to be best practices, response protocols consistent with, and oftentimes exceeding, at that time, CDC guidelines, and how we were handling the epidemic, the pandemic, as it spread throughout Orange County Jail. Calls for service, we got out ahead of early on. We changed our posture and how we're responding to calls for service in the areas patrolled by the Sheriff's Department. I know you have your own Newport Beach Police Department, but the Sheriff's Department does provide direct patrol services for about 1/4 of the county's 3.2 million residents. We are the police department, about 800,000 residents in Orange County, through 13 contract cities and also the unincorporated areas. And what we did was kind of a messaging campaign through our dispatch. If you were calling for service, either to respond to a report or some type of service provision through the Sheriff's Department, you would be told to be prepared for a response that's not normal. Deputies would ask to meet you outside. They would be wearing a mask. They'd be practicing safety protocols. And many of the service deliveries that we had up to that point, we stopped. We stopped doing counter services, and certain things that we could do either via the internet, email, or by telephone, we switched to prevent the in-person contact. And I think that was very, very effective. When it came to COVID-19, though, in our jails, it was a little different. We had reduced our population down through attrition and some early releases. That's been the first time in well over a decade that we had to release, or I chose to release individuals early from custody. And in doing that, I came up with my own protocols and what would qualify for a release from the jail. And it was a low-level offense, somebody who was already sentenced without any holds that would prevent them from being released. And we were just releasing them a little bit earlier than normal. So if they were going to be released, say, by September 1st, we might let them out a few weeks early. To date, we released about 800 people early from jail. And of those, a significant portion of them, about 25%, were those who were designated at risk by CDC guidelines of being high-risk populations because of existing medical conditions or some other form. And that may sound like a lot, but we have about 61,000 people who cycle through the Orange County Jail on an annual basis. So 800 over the course of the last 5 months is really not a large number comparatively. But probably the most important thing that we did, and I know we'll talk about protections that might take place, but one of the most important things we did in the jail when we had our first inmate that had the symptomology and tested positive for COVID was to then isolate that person medically away from the rest of the jail population, and anybody who had contact with an individual in a housing environment. And we can trace people like in the jail that we can't, in ways we cannot do in the community. Every inmate has a RFID card that they scan in and out, obviously in a controlled environment, but if they're going to a chow hall or to a program or to religious service or a visit, they have to scan themselves in and out. And for that reason, when you look at contact tracing, we could find out every place this person was to the minute, who was there with them, and then obviously go back, and anybody who was exposed to that person or anybody else who had COVID-19, we could then quarantine that individual. And that's what we did. We started quarantining anybody who was exposed. At our height in mid-April, we had 220 active cases that we knew of. And through these protocols, we flattened that curve and mitigated it back down. And as of today, we have 30 individuals in the jail who have COVID-19, and only 9 of those are from intra-facility transfers throughout the jail. The other thing we did was we started a quarantine of all new bookings. And so the remaining 21 people who have COVID-19 currently came from the community. They were arrested, had COVID-19, came into our jail. We quarantined them, identified them once they had it, and then obviously isolate them so they don't spread it throughout the jail facility. The one thing we realized early on, which I think was even ahead of the community, was when we had those individuals entrusted to our care, those inmates, and they were quarantined because they had contact with somebody who was known to have COVID-19. Once we tested them on day 12 before we released them back into the general population, which Nobody else was doing it at the time, which is very difficult to do in the community. 80 to 85% of that population were asymptomatic and positive with COVID-19. And that shows a lot about how this disease works and how it can be transmitted. And if you compare that to the community, which I think is a concern of many of us, that you can have people who aren't symptomatic, they're not sick, they're not having the symptoms of being sick, but can be positive with COVID-19 and walking about and unknowingly infecting friends, loved ones, coworkers, or members of the community, which is what we're trying to prevent from happening. The one thing that I also will share is the way we flatten that curve in the jail is we did that by adhering to all the recommendations that are out there. Everybody in the jail wore a mask. Inmates were all issued masks. All of our personnel working there by healthcare and deputies or anybody working within the jail wore masks when they were working there, and strict adherence to hygiene guidelines and cleanliness. And that got us way out ahead of it. So today we've had 506 inmates tested positive. Currently 30 are remaining, and we have 690 in quarantine, and of that 580 are new booking quarantine, which is those people coming in as a safeguard. Everybody gets quarantined. That does not mean they don't get access to programs and services. They do. They're just not commingled with the rest of the jail population. We've also had 159 employees test positive over time. We had 2 that were hospitalized at one point. They've both been released, have fully recovered. Fortunately, we have not had a death within our department family, or an inmate entrusted to our care has not been succumbed to the illness, which I think is a positive thing, obviously. Of the 159, we have 22 still active cases of employees, and that number is down significantly from where it just was about a week or 2 weeks ago when it was nearing triple digits. When it comes to the other issue we were facing regarding the protests that took place, this is something that impacted all of us equally. When I saw the tactic, if you even can call it that, in Minneapolis that took the life of George Floyd, I can tell you from my perspective, and I think I speak for Chief Lewis, I've never seen anything like that ever deployed as a tactic. It's not something we train for here in Orange County. We train most of the law enforcement agencies through our Sheriff's Academy, and it's not something that we would ever use as a technique. But that did obviously cause a nationwide response. To date, we've had over 60 protests in Orange County of varying degrees, and I know Newport Beach had many of them there. The Sheriff's Department deployed resources to over 50 of them. We have deployed thousands of our deputies as part of a crowd control response. And I will tell this group, first and foremost, our primary mission when we go out to protest is the protection of First Amendment rights, to ensure that people can safely be heard, have their voice be heard, and share their message, whether I agree with it or not. That is a constitutional guarantee, and I'm proud that we have the ability to do that. Beyond that, which I think is difficult for some people to realize, is First Amendment, by the language of it, is to peaceably assemble. When that goes into what we call civil unrest, criminal acts, vandalism, theft, violence, hurling objects, that is an unlawful assembly. And when that occurs, anybody there has to leave, has to disassemble by the order. We cannot have half of them throwing things at us and half holding a sign. By default, everybody there has to vacate the area. And I think that's hard for some people to grasp from the concept of, I was just there being peaceful. Well, we can't differentiate the both when people are committing criminal acts. I do have a sheriff's response team. It's hundreds of deputies who are trained specifically for crowd control techniques, and they're highly trained, and they show tremendous professionalism and restraint. I know that we were deployed to several times in Newport Beach and worked with Newport Beach Police Department and Chief Lewis closely to ensure that First Amendment rights were protected, and obviously it was done peaceably, which I think is a great success. When it comes to police reform, and it gets a little frustrating for me, quite honestly, because some of the national narrative that took place, and I hate to say it any other way than just this, doesn't really apply to us. When we had these movements of, 8 can't wait to be heard, that whole movement, the 8 things that law enforcement needs to change in order to be more, progressive or more contemporary. And when people would tell me these things, I would say, yes, I agree. I agree so much that everything on the list we did years ago, it doesn't apply to us here, because we're way out ahead of the curve, I think, when it comes to how advanced law enforcement is in Southern California. I heard people tell me repeatedly there's no accountability in law enforcement, and that's simply not true. And I think what these people would know, if I were to tell people of the over 356,000 encounters we had last year with the Sheriff's Department, only resulted in 421 uses of force. And a use of force by our definition is anything beyond mere handcuffing somebody. If we have to control them into a control technique or manipulate them in some way using pushing or pulling force, that is a use of force by our definition, and we have only 421. To put that in perspective, that's 118 per 100,000 contacts. It is extremely low on a national comparative. And when it comes to accountability, when people would say we don't hold people accountable, I assure you that we do. We had in 2019, 126 internal affairs investigations. I have a much larger agency than Newport Beach, so that number may sound significantly high, but I have almost 4,000 employees in the department, another 800 volunteers. It's a large organization. The Sheriff's Department in Orange County is the 5th largest Sheriff's Department in the nation. We get overshadowed by Los Angeles and LAPD to the north for how large those departments are. But if I were to tell you of the 126 internal affairs investigations, that 84% of those investigations were started by our staff identifying conduct that we saw that didn't meet our expectations and needed to be reviewed. Put a different way, 17 out of 20 we start, and 3 out of 20 investigations come from the public through complaint or some other mechanism. We most definitely do hold our people accountable, up to and including termination from the department. And the last thing I'll share you with, because I'm looking at the clock and I think I might be really pushing on some time, when it comes to the impacts, not only of COVID-19, but also the impacts that have been brought upon us by the protests that have significant costs. Our budgets were tight before COVID-19. And the most impactful thing that we're realizing now as a result of COVID-19 and with some of the police reform has been the revenue that comes into us, into the county and our departments to pay for government and things like public safety. The impact on the economy and what that will do to sales tax is going to have a profound impact on the funding of law enforcement and government going forward. And you couple that with the defund the police movement, which is obviously not something I'm supportive of. I am supportive of, though, the hidden message in there. I've been an advocate for many years to support social programs that have been underfunded from the state for a period of time. Mental health, for example, has not been funded according to what the needs are that we're experiencing. I run the largest mental health hospital in Orange County. It's called the Orange County Jail. 2 out of 5 inmates entrusted to my care prior to COVID-19 have a daily nexus to mental health treatment. That's 2,000 people on any given day that need mental health treatment within the Orange County jail system, a 60% increase over the last 5 years. I have 100 to 120 people in my care who are detoxing under medical supervision for alcohol and or drugs. And then of course the homeless issue that we face as well, when a significant portion of my population, 1 in 5 who come through my jail, self-declare themselves as being homeless. Those are all social failures that have happened throughout time, over time, and throughout the state. And with those failures and these issues manifesting into law enforcement contact as a default, not by design, it's easy to see why we're having difficulties as a profession in addressing all these social issues. And I am an advocate for those social programs to be adequately funded, so these people, when they're in mental health crisis or in substance abuse or homeless, have some other avenue to get help that they need and prevent them from having contact with law enforcement. The first face of government any of these 3 elements should come in contact with should not be a peace officer when they're in crisis. There has to be some other intervention strategy. And there's a lot of legislation, and I can cover that if you like at the end, that's going through the state that's impacting the way we are delivering services, both through the public safety corridor that we provide, and also with challenges to some of our very successful programs that, if they cease, will only have repercussions later on in dealing with juveniles and other high-risk groups to try that we divert out of the criminal justice system early so that they don't enter into the criminal justice system as adults. And with that, I'll stop. My clock says 4:27. I may have gone too fast for some of you. If you have questions for me, I will be around at the end. If I can cover one last thing that real quick, I apologize, that just came to my mind, is the mass release is happening throughout the state prison system right now through California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. The announcement of 17,000 plus prisoners being released anywhere from 6 months to 1 year early. That's going to have a profound effect and impact upon the way Chief Lewis and his officers in Newport Beach and myself and our deputies deliver services to keep Orange County safe, and especially upon the jail, as many of these people will recidivate, reviolate through a new law violation or the terms of their release and come back to my jail, not go back to state prison, which makes it much more difficult for me to address the challenges I face with COVID-19 when the state is in essence abdicating its responsibilities under local government.
Thank you, Sheriff Barnes. That was highly informative and, as you said, jam-packed with information, and I'm getting a lot of chatter from our participants with questions. So I will continue on with introducing Newport Beach Police Chief John Lewis, and then we'll move on to the questions, which I think will be highly informative as well. Chief John Lewis is the 10th chief in the department's history, assuming office on March 22nd, 2016, after 25 years working in the department. He's worked a gamut of assignments, including gang suppression, drug recognition expert, SWAT, economic crimes detective, patrol sergeant, professional standards unit sergeant, and deputy chief, among many others. Chief Lewis holds a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice with a minor in speech communication from Long Beach State University and a Master of Arts degree in criminal justice from Chapman University. He is a graduate of several advanced law enforcement training courses, including the Sherman Block Supervisory Leadership Institute, as well as the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training Command College. Welcome, Chief John Lewis.
Thanks, Robin. What an honor it is to be here. And again, you can understand how fortunate we are for Sheriff Barnes and his leadership just based on his comments. And I will just tell you that we in law enforcement and in this county and in the state benefit from his experience, his commitment, and frankly, his leadership. So he is a great partner to us here in Newport Beach, and I am sincerely grateful for his friendship. I also want to recognize our mayor, Will O'Neill, who's here on the line, and people are probably not going to know this, but in terms of dedication, this is his week to be out of town with his family, and he's here with us at Speak Up Newport. And I think it just, again, testament to his leadership and the trying times that this year of 2020 has been to us. So, Mr. Mayor, I hope you're enjoying your vacation, and but thank you for being here with us, but thank you for being alongside all of us in your capable and effective leadership in one of these times that I don't think that we, it's safe to say that I don't think that we will ever forget. So I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of what this has looked like for us in Newport Beach and the Newport Beach Police Department. And so we're in a space here recently where the city's in the process of transitioning to the reopening of recreational spaces, businesses, and services. And we had City Hall that had been closed for a little while, and people are coming back to work, and things look like we are going to start to transition back to a little bit more normal here in the city. And it just all came to a halt with the most recent spike of cases that we've seen here. So with that being said, here we are in summer, and I will tell you, I feel like this has been the longest summer ever. It started in March, and it just has not come to an end because we have everybody out of school and out of work, and there's millions of people in Orange County. There is, or in the Southern California area, and there is one beach, right? So, and the beach has been the place that people have used because it's open and it's available, and it's amazing here in Newport in particular. So we have seen additional service demands that have been placed on our folks, and this has all been in the context of the global pandemic here. So we've seen significant increases in crowds and traffic, particularly in West Newport, Corona Del Mar, and then the sheriff mentioned too. Combine all this with the lessening jail populations at the state level, and we're seeing that really evidenced in the many arrests and investigations that we have seen here in Newport Beach that are involving repeat offenders that are targeting our city. So over the course of these past several months, though, I can tell you this, that we have learned a great deal about COVID-19 and the precautions that we need to keep all of our personnel safe and healthy. And the sheriff touched on this, and I'll talk a little bit about it too, because we while people have been gratefully staying safe at home, our folks have been out there every day on the street, in the jails, and really providing the most essential of services, in my opinion, and that's public safety. And there's a lot that goes into that. And some of those practices that we've seen that we've had to change operationally are the use of our online reporting systems, telephonic reporting, really an emphasis, as the sheriff mentioned, on our open air interactions to make sure that our folks that are doing our business, sometimes in ways that are non-traditional, but they're ways that we believe, combined with the effective use of our PPE, personal protective equipment, that can safely minimize our exposure and risk while continuing to fill our mission of providing the highest quality police service, which is expected of us here in Newport Beach. And one of the challenges that we are going to have, and I think for all of us, not just in law enforcement, is that we have to remain vigilant in terms of our protections and our emphasis on keeping ourselves healthy right now. And I think that with all of us, I've heard everything from quarantine fatigue. I mean, there's all these different names for it right now, but it is very difficult to not get complacent right now, because the threat that we're facing right now has not changed appreciably. I mean, we're seeing the numbers that are going down, which is a good and encouraging thing. But again, some of the risk management strategies that we're using, I believe, is help with that. But that being said, the Los Angeles Police Department lost an officer from complications related to COVID-19 last month, and our thoughts and prayers are with Chief Moore and the men and women of Los Angeles Police Department, and Officer Martinez and his family, and locally, John Hamilton, we all know, super involved in our community and just a great man, recently passed last week due to complications related to COVID-19. So it's still here, it's still with it. We still have to be on guard and we still have to be vigilant. So with that, combined with all the other issues that we're facing here right now, we're still in a challenging time, and we still have to understand that that's the space that we're operating in here. But I will tell you this, each and every day over these past several months, your police officers, your deputy sheriffs, in my opinion, have been the calm and an ever-changing and I think it's safe to say chaotic environment. We're going to continue to make more adjustments and changes as we move forward. I mean, that's what it is. And sometimes it's hour to hour, day to day, and sometimes it's minute to minute. But I just think the professionalism, the dedication to duty, the commitment to our mission and frankly to each other in this community and in this law enforcement community throughout this unbelievably challenging time is just such a testament to the quality of individual that we have out there on our streets providing for all of our public safety. So again, I think, again, the sheriff, I have deep gratitude and respect for. I think we here in Orange County, and I'm of course going to be very biased, have been a model for many in this business in our profession about how to rationally deal with the crisis here and how we do it in the best way we can and to make good decisions and to take care of our people, but also stay focused on public safety. So I know that I've got some time here and I want to answer questions too, but there's something I want to touch on too. And the sheriff mentioned this, and this is the continuing release of prisoners to free up space to contain the growth of COVID positive inmates from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And so what we're seeing here is when we understand that there's going to be some impacts when we're seeing some early releases, the volume and the numbers is what have all of us in this business concerned. I mean, when you're talking about 17,000 plus inmates, and these are at-risk felons that will likely be released into our communities in a large volume here, and it's already happening. We're concerned about the release of them, or we're concerned about what this is going to do and how it's going to impact public safety in our communities. But we also understand and we acknowledge the predicament that the CDCR is in right now to reduce the prison population due to COVID. So I think that there's a lot of discussion about this right now at the state level. In Orange County, the sheriff has been a strong voice advocating for public safety. And then also myself, I'm on the executive board for the California Police Chiefs Association. And we are in these conversations with Sacramento to understand that we're in a tough position. Everybody is right now, but we also we have to understand what this is going to look like for public safety in our communities, because it's going to come down to the local cities that are going to be impacted by this significantly. So it's a very serious issue, and it's one that we're tracking and highly involved in as well. So I want to talk real quickly about, there was a question here, what plans will we talk about at the national trend in civil unrest? in Orange County or Newport Beach continues. And I think that we've seen a lot of those strategies play out and how we have dealt with some of the large events and protests in this county, and where we are situated a little bit differently, I think, in Orange County than some other areas in the nation is our mutual aid protocols. And the way we do things here in Orange County is mutual aid is something that we do on a regular basis. Let's say, for example, that Laguna Beach has some major event in their city that requires, let's say it's just a really bad accident and it ties up their patrol teams. We have the ability to move in and handle their radio calls and handle calls for service and police their city in a moment's notice until they're able to staff up and get to a position where they can take over their own service level demands. So we do that on a regular basis. And so when these large events within the county occur, we have the ability to take that same framework and scale it up for these large events. And that's something that in Orange County that we share a lot of the same equipment, the radio systems, tactics, policies, and training that are very similar to each of our agencies, and gives us the flexibility to be able to deal with these large scale events, deal with it quickly, and then be able to be on the same sheet of music. And the sheriff mentioned it too. I mean, what we're talking about here when we're dealing with these protests, and it's for all of our agencies in the county. I mean, our mission is to keep the peace and to ensure the protection of constitutional rights of all members of the public, and it's as simple as that. And we're going to do this through the common training that we share with our crowd management strategies. That really the idea here is just to mitigate the possibility of a lawful crowd escalating into an unlawful assembly or in a very difficult situation, a riot. So that's how we do it in Orange County. And I think that we managed some very large events that had potentials to be problematic, and we were able to do it successfully. And again, that's this cooperation across the board, across the county, and with the Sheriff's Department as well.
Thank you, Chief Lewis. So this is Robin Grant, again, moderating the two panelists. And we do have some questions from the audience and some questions prepared by our Speak Up Newport Board of Directors. And I'm going to jump around a little bit, given the sort of narrative that each of you has presented. I want to start with something that you both touched on, which is the early release of prisoners. And there is concern in the community about early release and public safety. And I'm just wondering if you could provide some insight to our listening public about what an individual can do that is concerned about early releases. Is there a suggested protocol for just a regular citizen to reach out about this issue?
Yeah, I'm going to go first if you don't mind, John. I think
Absolutely.
This is the part where it takes a little bit of community activation in getting involved. First, let me summarize again why this is very critical, not just to Orange County, but the operations therein. I was on a conference call earlier today, and one of the participants representing CDCR was talking about how successful they've been in bringing down the population, the state prison system, the lowest it's been in a decade. And they did that, in his words, through attrition. And I corrected him, it's not through attrition. When you are not receiving state prisoners from the local jails, and that's how they get to state prison, by the way, is they come to local jails, they go through court, they get sentenced to state prison, and we send them from our jails to state prison. For 5 months, they haven't received anybody from a local jail. Well, almost. They had a brief period where they received from 4 counties. We were not one of them. So when you stop people coming in the back door and you open the floodgates, or stop people coming in the front door and open the floodgates in the back door, to claim that that was done responsibly through attrition is really not a responsible statement to be made. But when they do come back here, and this is the risk to us locally and to me specifically, if they come back and violate the terms, when I was talking to months ago about when they were contemplating releasing people, I asked specifically, if you have somebody who violates the terms of their release, are they going back to state prison or are they coming to me? And they said, no, we'll take them back to state prison. And then they flip-flopped and they said, no, now they're going back to you. So all these, it's just a compounding of these issues that manifest and fall on the shoulders of local law enforcement to deal with at the expense of the communities. If you look at homeless issues, that's been a statewide failure in funding strategies that have rolled down and fallen on local law enforcement, impacted the communities. Mental illness, substance use disorder, the decriminalization of drug crime has all created this environment that has been an abdication of state responsibility through legislation and other means to shift all these things off of the state responsibility, off of their budget onto local entities to deal with. And so, and this is where it's important for two things. Don't be a victim of crime. Wherever you can, don't make sure that you don't leave items of value in plain sight in your car. Lock your car at night. If possible, put it in a garage with the door shut. If you see something suspicious in your neighborhood, please call it in. Dial 911 if it's happening now. Let us go out and see what that is. And if it's necessary, we'll intervene and make an arrest or take appropriate action. We'd much rather err on the side of caution than to go out 4 hours later when somebody gets home and realizes their house was burglarized and somebody didn't call in when they saw something suspicious. So don't be a willing participant in being a victim of crime. I think that's probably one of the most important things. And what I've shared with you at the beginning, and this works, if you are upset about some of the legislative decisions or decisions being made in the state legislature, pick up the phone and call. You can write a letter. Letters get read. Emails fall into, just like it is anywhere else, it falls into Outlook and they'll get to them when they can, but they cannot not answer the phone. And so whenever you have the opportunity, if you can, call either the governor's office or CDCR or your local legislator and let them know how disappointed you are in some of the policies, if in fact you don't agree with them. And those do have a very impactful voice. For every person who calls, that's about 1,000 people who view the same way you do that didn't make a call. And it does change minds and change opinions in Sacramento.
Great, thank you. That's good advice. I'll direct the next question to Chief Lewis. And what I'd like to talk a little bit about is whether the Newport Beach Police Department has encountered the recent call-out culture phenomenon, where citizens contact the police for perceived violations of pandemic policies like wearing masks or maintaining an appropriate social distance. How is your department diffusing these conflicts among what we would consider our regular citizenry?
We've received a lot of calls about that, and it's been something that we've really had to grow into. And to me, this is basic community policing is what it boils down to. And so we take the calls. We are open 24/7, and we're gonna respond, and we're gonna take the opportunity to go out and work through these things. Now, we've had some issues where we've had some less than desirable behavior that's happened in a couple of our businesses that we've been able to work through. We've also had calls where we've had people that have, reported these different violations, whether it be at the parks or some of these others. And when we've gone out and had conversations with folks, we've been getting great results with that. And so again, I think that, people are understanding for the most part. I believe that there are some exceptions, but for the most part in our community, we've been receiving some really good cooperation in terms of, what we're trying to get accomplished here. And it's been getting significantly better too. And I think that people understand that we're in a time right now where, some consideration towards others really goes a long way, and a little bit of grace and understanding is something that goes a long way as well. So we respond to calls for service when we go out. But again, this is basic being real, community policing, talking to folks and working through these things. And we've been getting some very good cooperation from that approach.
Thank you. So we've had a number of, I would say the majority of questions that we've had either through the Q&A or chat, either prior to this or during this webinar, are really directed towards the concept of systemic racism in law enforcement, which has been widely publicized in recent months. And I guess to coalesce all of the kind of inquiries that we've had from sources in this webinar into one question would be, how do you perceive systemic racism in your organization, and how are you responding, especially in the context of the more recent civil unrest and any maybe modifications to policy that you've made? Maybe start with Sheriff Barnes.
Sorry, I was trying to get my screen unmuted.
Oh.
So that's a pretty, I can only tell you the answer this way. First, there's a broad assumption that systemic racism is a pretty compounding principle to fall on as just a default. Does racism exist throughout the United States? Absolutely. I would believe that if we have somebody who acts in a racist manner within the sheriff's department, I mean, deliberately or maliciously targeting somebody based on their race or ethnicity or sexual orientation, that we would address that and make sure that does not happen. So we train, as I mentioned, in the sheriff's department. There are many opportunities through different groups to come in and share their concerns, both through the Orange County Human Relations Commission, who has a segment within our academy, members of the LGBTQ community come in. I'm a member of the LGBTQ Policing Partnership with Orange County LGBTQ Center, to have those conversations about how to appropriately address somebody who may be transgender, for example, so that we don't unknowingly harm somebody. And I think that starts through a dialogue of mutual understanding. I have had probably, I've lost track of how many Zoom conferences of some way or first-person conversations I've had actively in the last 3 months on police-community relations, social justice issues. And this didn't start 3 months ago. This has been going on for years as we tried to change the system that we have in Orange County. I don't necessarily agree with the foundation of a fallback on just systemic racism. I think that is it's a pretty broad statement. If you're going to use that term, you have to apply it to everybody equally throughout not only Orange County, every profession, every race, because it's based on the presumption then that we're all inherently racist and a participant in that. I'm not trying to take away the harms and the beliefs of those who have been subjected to racism. I'm not trying to discount that in any way. I hope that didn't come across that way. But I know that we have, I'm not shy, I won't shy away from the crucial conversations that need to be had. And I think it's difficult for me now as we've now months after George Floyd and all the real beneficial conversations that took place, and those who were at the table with me, 3 months ago to have these difficult conversations aren't here anymore. We're trying to still deal with this. I know COVID-19 and the restrictions on congregate settings impacts that, but I'm having conversations with people that have already moved on. I can't say it any other way than that. They're not here with me. And how that bothers me is we can't have this conversation about George Floyd and Ferguson and all these other things in 2-year increments. We have to get out ahead of it and reconcile how we address these issues as one community, not the law enforcement profession and the Black community, just a community as a whole, and change the way we address these issues once and for all so that we don't revisit this in 1-year increments throughout the rest of our lives.
Thank you. Chief Lewis, maybe you could just expand on that and talk particularly, because we are getting a number of questions from interested residents or participants in this panel, specifically about what is the protocol for hiring, continuing education, that kind of thing when it relates to issues of racism, genderism, all the whole gamut of issues related to that.
So I'll address that specifically, and then I want to talk a little bit more broadly about how we approach this in Newport Beach. But in terms of the hiring practices, a lot of folks don't know this, but our hiring practices, it probably takes us in excess of a year just to hire one individual and get them trained up and get them out on the street. And there's a significant process that goes behind it. So we start with maybe 1 out of 100 applicants that even gets put into a background phase. And then this is people that have to pass a written test and an oral interview and a psychiatric, all these things, right? Before they get there, right? And then they go through a background phase where we go through everything from their high school grades to knock on their neighbors' doors to talk to relatives. It's about the most intrusive and uncomfortable thing you can possibly imagine having to go through. And then we follow that up with a polygraph test to ensure that everything that they have told us is accurate as well, in addition to everything that our investigators have found out about this individual. But I can tell you here in Newport Beach, what it comes down to at the bottom line is an interview with me. you will not wear this uniform. You will not have the badge of the Newport Beach Police Department unless I okay it. And before it even gets there, it is it's vetted through all the way through our command staff, all of our deputy chiefs, and then this person has to have a one-on-one with me. And frankly, not everybody makes it through that interview, because I think in this business that we, and particularly in Newport Beach, we expect that we are going to have the best police officers, and that's my goal. That's what I feel my obligation that this community expects of me, and that's where it starts, is getting the best people in the door. But you know what? There's also another piece to this too, is getting the best people in the door, getting them trained up, reflective of our community values, our integrity, and understanding of how important this job is, and how important it is to do it correctly. There's also the accountability piece too, and that when people mess up and they are not going to be a fit for this organization, then we have a process to remove them as well. Because I understand that, and this is what I want to talk about a little bit more broadly, is that really a lot of these things, and the sheriff mentioned it, is, talking about assumptions. To me, this is all a question of trust. This is our community trusting our police department to go out and to treat people mindful of dignity and respect, and treat people in a way that they would expect to be treated. These are basic, simple concepts here, okay? But sometimes I think we need to bring it back to really what it is that we're talking about here. And that's, to me, that's it. It's trust, and it's our community that having the trust in our police department, having their trust in me, having that kind of trust in the sheriff to put the best people on the street and perform in a way that is professional and is admirable and is befitting the badge and the oath that they are sworn to take on. And that really is where it is when it comes to this kind of stuff. But we also have to have the ability to send these people in a different direction other than our agencies too. We find them in a situation where they're compromising our brand as a police department, but they're also compromising our ethics and integrity as a law enforcement profession. And I think that that's something that we have to stay focused on. We have to stay vigilant on. And again, that's trust. It takes a long time to build it up in a community. And I'm proud of the level of trust that we have with the Newport Beach community, but this is by no means an accident. And the sheriff had mentioned it, and I'll say it again too. A lot of that trust comes because we have the ability to be out there on the street in meetings like this and have conversations with folks, and being open, being responsive to criticism, and understanding that we are public servants. At the end of the day, that is what we do. And part of that service is understanding the community, their needs, and truly listening. And that's something that we always have to stay focused on. Because again, a lot of this that you hear is boils down to a trust issue for me. And we got to keep that in the center as a bullseye for everything that we're doing when we're out there on the street.
Thank you. I'll open up the last question to sort of a conversation between the two of you so that we can kind of cap this and maybe make the topic about this evolving landscape that we're in. And for a long time, we weren't really dealing with police procedure because we were newly dealing with the pandemic and quarantining. And now we've sort of evolved into a changing landscape for the police departments and sheriff's departments, not only in our area here, but nationwide. And I think we've had quite a few questions just asking kind of a similar thing, which is, can you explain what you think is the most significant either policy change or change in protocol implemented in your organization since the pandemic or the civil unrest started?
I'll go first, John. I think when you look at where we were, and I made a decision probably 3 months, 2-3 months ago now, to suspend the use of the carotid control technique, which is oftentimes labeled the chokehold. It is a legitimate, trained mixed martial arts technique. If you ever watch MMA, it's a technique that you use as a submission hold. In the course of 2019, we had 4 applications of that, of the over 300 some odd thousand contacts I spoke about. And it worked twice. It didn't work twice, which means when it didn't work, it didn't mean we choked somebody, we killed anybody. It just didn't get them into submission. Looking at the infrequency of its application, coupled with the high level, which was trained to be proficient, I didn't see it as that big of a deal to try to fight to retain it. So from a policy perspective, probably the most impactful internally. It was not popular within the department for me to take away a tool. When we had that technique 30 plus years ago when I went through the academy, that was really one of the only tools we had in the toolbox. We had our hands, we had the carotid control technique, we had a baton, which was blunt force instrument, and we had a gun. And now we have, in the interim, we have tasers and we have pepper spray and we have a lot of other things. We train now and throughout our advanced officer training and throughout our academy de-escalation techniques. We're much more advanced, I think way ahead of the curve when it comes to mitigating risk in interactions with the public. And quite honestly, the officers, the deputies that we're hiring today, somebody asked me a question recently, you know, what we look for. And if you asked me that question 30 years ago, I would say the biggest, the strongest, the fastest. It was just, that's what, from my perspective, at the bottom rung of the ladder, that's what it seemed it took to do this job. You ask me that question today, I will tell you any day of the week and twice on Sunday, I'll take the deputy who can talk somebody into voluntary compliance. Great communication skills is what I'm looking for, and somebody who represents well in a customer service-based industry, which law enforcement is. We're morphing into more of a business environment when we should be there years ago, but I've always had this belief, and I've said it many times, I want to be the Nordstroms of law enforcement. I want to be that person known for a high level of service to the public, and I think that we do a great job day to day in doing that. So for me, it's probably that one policy change that took place. It may seem simple on its face, but it really was a pretty big deal to make that move.
Thank you. And Chief Lewis?
That was the one that the sheriff had mentioned that was probably the one that was a source of the largest controversy internally for us in law enforcement. But the ones that I'm concerned about right now and that we're paying attention to and tracking, and Phil Betancourt had mentioned some of his questions about legislation coming out of Sacramento and how that's going to affect our police departments. And the answer to Phil's question is yes. If these legislative initiatives pass, then they are ones that will guide our operations in the street. And there's some things that are everything from what uniforms look like to different applications of force. And there are some things that are there's some questions in terms of how practical these different initiatives are actually going to be when they get down to our level here on the street. And those are the ones that we are very actively involved in right now. And I think that all of us understand that where there's areas to improve, we are all for that. And I don't think that there's a lot of resistance in terms of, being reflective and looking for best practices and continuing to evolve and get better. I think we are all in agreement upon that. But I think that there's some things that I think it really just is from a lack of understanding of police practices that are just not practical, that are being proposed right now. And so what we're involved with that process, but we are also concerned with some of the things that are being proposed up there. So there's more to follow on that, but it's certainly something that we're watching and paying attention to.
Thank you both so much. This has been very informative, and we are honored at Speak Up Newport to host both of you on this panel, and really appreciate your taking time to be with us today. I will now turn the program back to the president of Speak Up Newport, Ed Selich. Ed?
Thank you, Robin. Well, again, thank you, Sheriff Barnes and Chief Lewis, for taking time out to participate. Also, thanks you for all you do to keep us safe in our community. It really is appreciated. Now, everyone, please plan on joining us on September the 9th for our next webinar in this series, which is going to be our biennial City Council Candidates Forum. Now, we have 3 seats set up for election this year. District 7, the incumbent Will Neal, he has no challengers. District 5, the incumbent is Jeff Herdman, and he has 1 challenger, Noah Blom. And District 2 incumbent Brad Avery also has 1 challenger, Nancy Scarborough. So please plan on attending and watching for our announcements on the program and how to register. It's sure to be a good forum. Until then, wear a mask, keep your distance, and be safe. Thank you, and good afternoon.